although I have done for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I had software development experience and so on. But the last 10 years, I've been a project officer in the voluntary sector. I have kind of deployed a couple of WordPress sites, commissioned some WordPress sites, things like that. So I want to actually say, or bring out what the voluntary sector wants from a kind of WordPress installations. I should also say I'm on the Scottish Accessible Information Forum, which is a government-funded forum, a very small project, where we're trying to we're trying to promote accessible information to the kind of statutory and voluntary sector as well. So we'd also like to look at the accessibility in the voluntary sector. And the reason that I think this session has kind of come about was I saw Mike's interview from Camp Portsmouth, where he was saying that envisaging in the next couple of years that there may be these kind of packages of WordPress and themes and plugins for specific sectors. I think you mentioned churches and real estate or something like that, and I was thinking, well, actually, why not the voluntary sector? So it actually gives me great pleasure to be here, to be with both Mike Little and John Adams.
Yeah, I'm John Adams. My day job is keeping Andy and Martin in check and stopping all their wonderful ideas coming in when you're our end users at DFID. But I've got an interest in the voluntary sector, which started probably about 10 years ago when I was asked to develop a website for the church I go to in Glasgow, which went through the usual sort of last 10 years of website development, starting from handcrafted PHP all the way through to something decent in WordPress. But we've also got involvement with, I suppose, a social enterprise attached to the church, which runs like a small business. So there's another different model of voluntary sector. I'm involved in an organisation that runs sort of monthly meetups. So again, a slightly different model of running. And I've also been doing some work for a small engineering NGO, which operates water and sanitation projects with developing country partners in mainly places like Pakistan, Tanzania, and places like that. So again, completely different models of voluntary sector. And I think I bring that sort of experience of those different sectors, but also because I've been involved in particularly that church and the type of activities the church does over a number of years, there's probably a depth to having been involved with people for 10, 15 years. You actually get to see the cycles that they go through and the way that people take WordPress and the way that they adapt to it. And I think that's one of the challenges I've got with the voluntary sector is actually ownership, and we'll come on to that.
Okay, I'm Mike Little, the co-founding developer of WordPress, so I like to say it's all my fault.
We blame you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I run my own business doing WordPress consultancy and WordPress development. And really I'm kind of involved in this panel because I have worked with a couple of third-party third sector organisations for development work that I've done. I'm also a bit of a sucker in that I find it hard to say no to a good cause. So I do a lot of work to help people out, even when I don't get paid for it. So, and I've got fair old WordPress knowledge.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting, you're talking about third sector, we're talking about voluntary sector. There seems to be quite a broad kind of range of different things, which is something that it might be interesting to kind of find out ourselves and the audience as well. Co-participants from the audience. You know, is anyone a kind of a supporter of a voluntary sector organisation? Do you support your time or possibly donations or something like that?
Yes, I contribute to the Working Rights Group, and I've volunteered in the past with Edinburgh-based charities on the technology side.
Yeah, there's a few church websites and as well, so we should compare them to that.
I I also contribute to the Open Rights Group, or I used to contribute to the Open Rights Group. In fact, I built their first website. There you go. In WordPress.
That seems interesting because I mean, in surveys there's maybe 12% or 20% of people that seem to volunteer, and then the people aren't kind of going forward. But I think that in a kind of open source software, that's actually very closely aligned with kind of voluntary sector, and maybe if you're developing with that, you're maybe not thinking that you're part of the voluntary sector, but it actually is it's part of that. We've kind of you asked a question about who works in the voluntary sector. It seems to be me. Okay, and the rest are kind of WordPress developers, right?
That's the thing what I found that in the past, whenever I've done work for free, it can be quite hard to get respect for the people that you're working with. So sometimes a wee nursery project that I was involved in, I think I was charging £15 a month or something, so but I had to try and fix a level that was almost free, but I knew from past experience that if I made it actually free, I would never get a meeting, the content would never arrive. So being entirely voluntary, I think there is a wee grey area as well. So you should take a little bit back.
I think that's funny, it's true. I'm working on a site for a charity, but in that everybody's voluntary and most people have jobs as well, if that makes sense. So everybody's got the same sort of respect for each other because we're all kind of doing the same sort of thing. But I have done the sort of thing you're talking about where you're giving your time to something where perhaps other people maybe are being paid, or there's a certain organisation or something like that. And I think I agree it's difficult sometimes to maybe I think people sometimes assume you do it because you have to rather than because you want to.
Yeah, if you look at the commercial sector at the site, there's a big difference. Why does it have to be that way? Why isn't it respect across the board? It just doesn't work out that way then.
At the graphics company, we almost entirely work for the third sector, the voluntary sector, as we might call it. I think we've got it's always tricky because a lot of those organisations don't have much money, but yet because it's our business, we charge a reasonable rate, and getting that balance right, I think can be difficult. So it's great to have the opportunity to do voluntary work as well. But yes, I certainly recognise all those issues.
I mean, in terms of the structure of the voluntary sector, there's a variety of umbrella bodies within that. You have your small charities, but they'll kind of pool resources somehow. One of which is in Scotland, it's the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, and I think there's the NCVO is the English equivalent. The SCVO does a survey, and where is it? I think it's 65% of voluntary sector organisations have an income of less than £25,000 a year. So there's not a lot of money in the sector, but we think they're doing good work. And there's 4% of the organisations are over £1 million income, and that's a couple of years ago. So it's about that. So it's far smaller than the enterprise. Sorry, I also should mention as well that of those there's 137,000 staff, which is relatively small, and it's smaller than enterprises. It's smaller than kind of I would say certainly the WordPress user base. All the kind of challenges of having working with small organisations is something.
I think there's benefits and challenges to working with small organisations. If you can like with any organisation, if you identify someone who's the driver for that change and is the owner of that change, then you're onto a winner. I think there are other organisations where they've got this sort of, they want a website, but nobody's actually prepared to put any work into it in terms of defining the content or the structure or anything like that. Then you've got a challenge. And maybe that's where the sort of the whole idea of putting value on the effort comes in, is that you say, look, this is going to cost you X amount of money to develop this. Are you prepared to put the same investment in yourselves? take it seriously.
You should put that money back. You know, you can take out small amount, you go to the Gallaudet or whatever, and you know, you could just. I just think it's useful in market time. You don't. You still got hourly voluntary.
Although, you know, let's not be. You know, we're not all that altruistic actually, and I think there are businesses who make money out of putting services, particularly towards the larger voluntary sector organisations, who have a reasonable funding stream.
And one quality service as well.
Yeah. You know, Foxfam came to me and said they want a web presence. Well, that's still handy, but you know.
So in my experience,
my brother.
In my experience, I've probably got an example of sort of two ends of it, two extremes of that kind of range. I run a local WordPress user group in Manchester, Enwood, and at the beginning of the year, I decided a good idea for the group as a whole to volunteer to build a website for a good cause. So we put the call out, and one of our occasional members works for a local community radio station, and they'd been using WordPress for their site, but had loads of problems with it. And so they came on board and we said, right, great, we'll build you a website. Your radio station, you've got some special needs in terms of how you present your information and things like that. So it'll be a great project for the group, meet up every month and progress it forward. So far, we've got nowhere. We've got loads of volunteers, but really we've got nowhere. And that's mainly because the organisation itself hasn't got the time to specify what they want. They are all volunteers. There's a small board, but they're all volunteers. Most of them work 2 days or less, and they have a really high turnover of volunteers. And so, I mean, we literally got one guy on board after, I think, about 3 months. We were told, oh, this guy, Kev, he's coming along, he's going to be responsible for sorting it out. By the time he got to his first meeting, he only had a week left of his volunteer time at the organisation, and then he was off, he was gone. So that's kind of one extreme where we've kind of wanted to be altruistic, put in the effort, and really it's not been very successful. The other end is that one of my biggest clients does a lot of work that's funded. Now it's funded by another charity, although he's not a charity himself, and he's a commercial organisation, but he does funded work and it's educational work. So something I've just volunteered to talk about later is I'm a scientist.org.uk, which is an educational site. Goes out to schools and gets kids involved in science and things. Doesn't cost the schools anything, but it's funded by Wellcome Trust and a few other funding bodies. And that's actually been probably my biggest client in the last 2 years. So I've earned a fortune off that guy, but he's still doing funded work, and he doesn't really make a profit off that. He pays for his staff's wages, but he doesn't make a huge profit out of it. So it's kind of two ends of extremes, and why I particularly talk about the third sector rather than just the voluntary sector, because it's a little bit different from that. But perhaps two good examples.
I think what you're getting at is something I find, which is that we all have to balance our altruism with client pre-screening. I've had a lot of voluntary sector organizations and groups tell me, well, someone did our website for free, but we don't know where he is now, so we can't get into it. And that tells me that's actually not the sort of client I want to take on, because they don't respect themselves as an organization. Yes, they can have the best mission in the world in mind, but if they are thinking of themselves as their own charity case, they are never going to get above that £25,000 mark.
I think as well as that, it's like it's stopping people getting carried away. As soon as the flip side of like not getting them engaged and like taking your attention is where they go the opposite end, where because it's free, they'll just keep bringing more and more and more and more demands. And certainly from probably we've all experienced it. When you build a site for somebody that you know or a friend or family where it's free, all of a sudden it just takes so much of your time because they go, oh, could it do this, could it do that? And I think sometimes people lose the core things that they want the site to do with all the things that it could do. And one of the approaches that I've taken is taking some out of the box templates like routines, where they've got different things for different categories and sectors, and saying that's what I can give you. If you wanted to do something other than that, then I'm probably not the right person to do it. But this can probably do 80-90% of what you want, and say the other 10% come back in a year's time when you say, look, we've reached the limit with what we can do with our website, and we really need to, develop this additional, geolocation, Wi-Fi, whatever it is that they want to do with it, iPhone applications. So that's certainly one thing. A number of people that come saying, oh, we need this to work on a mobile device, with their initial requirements, and you're like, well, start off with getting the site to work, and then once you've got that, move on to all the other things that you think can add value.
Yeah, I think it's often hard maybe to know where your own boundaries are when you don't have a pay structure involved, because I found that in the past when I've done maybe like usually like small little sites for like local charities and things, like where my dad lives, that kind of thing. Just little things where it's not a big job and you just kind of put it together and maybe base it off of something pre-existing and you're just kind of doing them a favour, but then that happens and then it's like, oh, and this and this and this, and then whereas normally you would have obviously written a spec and had a brief and kind of had a pay structure or maybe had a a quote and it was all been signed off, and you sort of, I found I've often forgot to do that when I'm doing these things that are just
so I think that's a really great point when you talk about writing specs and all the rest of it. Most of the people in the WordPress community and all the rest of it are very developer focused. They're people that want to try and get their hands in and all the rest of it. I've met one other WordPress project manager. And I've been doing this for years. And the reality is because we want to get involved, we want to fix things, but we never usually sit down other than contracts and actually brief something out and go, actually technically this is going to do this and this and this, unless you've got a structure in place. And for most 1 to 2 person agencies or when people are starting off, that's something I think most of us fall over.
I think it's really easy with WordPress to set expectations. You can build a prototype in minutes, you hand it over to the client, let them work with it and say, does this do what you need it to do? And then if they say, yeah, this is doing exactly what I want it to do, you kind of can streamline the requirements, the specification, if you give them a prototype very early on and let them play with it and say, is this working for you?
I had a good experience with an Edinburgh charity a couple of years ago. I was volunteering with them, and they were looking to get a new website done. So I sat in with them and I helped them develop the specification. I said, well, is that actually what you wanted to do? So I helped them walk through the spec process. And then when they got to the tender, I sat on the tender boards, as Chris knows, and kind of help them evaluate all the things that came in and work out what it was that they needed and which proposals would meet their needs. Chris and Grant come in with a WordPress-based proposal, and then we decided we needed something a bit bulkier, so we went for the Drupal stuff.
I think it's all the must-haves that get then overridden by the should-haves and could-haves, and it just turns what could be a very cheap and simple site into something that you're spending, £20,000–30,000 worth. Even if it's just your time and they're not paying for it, it can be a black hole.
So is there some kind of functionality, some kind of core functionality for the voluntary sector? We've seen that they're generally small organisations. Is there some way of kind of finding what is kind of standard enough for a lot of the sites? I mean,
I think just to say that, I think what we might be doing is offering people a website instead of saying, I'm offering you 25 hours of web development time. No, this is what we do from a commercial client. I'm not asking any money. But if you start on day 3 suddenly adding video on mobile devices, that's fine. You're going to run out of steam before. But yeah, let's do 25 hours. Let's get you up, and then maybe I'll give you another 25 hours. I don't know, but let's you come with the content, because quite often people don't want to experience something like negative. But sometimes people would rather tell you or give you a requirement than go back and write content. I really, you do want the stuff out. So maybe you don't promise a website, you say, no, you've got my time, that's same as a joiner, same as the guy who does your washing machine. Yes, I'll do it, but this one.
The problem with that is though that your average person doesn't know how much 25 hours of development time is. You're as well offering them a certain number of orange traffic codes. And and this is what you've then got to quantify. And I think as well, something that you said is that we generally as developers are really bad at taking user requirements. We're very good at going, so this is it, when actually someone means something slightly different. And a great example in WordPress of that is the feature image part of the upload thing. It's really brilliant because the featured image is decided that it must be the same as the thumbnail image because they built it because people wanted a thumbnail image. Without the idea that actually a featured image and the thumbnail image might need to be different sizes based on the look or the page or the rest of it. We really need, on the whole as developers, to start taking a different level of user story the whole way through, and that's a huge time save.
I think it helps sometimes if you have got somebody who's responsible for speccing what it is they need, and if they're not technical. So I'm a partner in another company that's funded, and my partner is not technical at all, and sometimes he asks for the impossible. I have to explain to him that it's not that easy, that's going to take him out of time. But one of the things that he's done is he's responsible for the funding, and the funding that he's got was, he's got 2 lots of funding now. We thankfully, very clever of him, got 10k from the lottery for the fund, which was great. But very specifically to build a prototype and a beta of the website. And so it meant that we could limit the functionality and trial it without trying to be all singing, all dancing, because we've got some fantastic plans of what we want to do with it, including multiple devices and all the rest of it. But we genuinely do try and limit the functionality. I mean, it's almost there. It's in beta now. There's a few more bits to tweak, but it's great because he keeps reminding me not to do the next bit, because actually we'll go for some more funding to take it further. And that's been great because I've tried to do it all by now, and it's already gone way over what I've earned. But yeah, so sometimes, as you say, a non-technical person keeping control of it is quite good, definitely.
So is there a core set of functionality that you think that particular organisation needs? That you're starting at, you know, can we come up with a core set of voluntary sector things that we need to build?
I think certainly in this particular case, it's not. Most of it is custom because it's as it happens, it's a custom event website. If you imagine timeout for disabled people, it's about accessible events. So there's a lot of custom code in there. But certainly in my experience on things, jobs that I've quoted for, things that people have talked about, certainly integration with CRMs is key, because a lot of voluntary organisations is all about managing their people who help them, people who contribute, so newsletters going out and things like that. If you can tie them into the website, that can be quite useful. Yeah, donation, absolutely, yeah. Multiple ways to take money off people, and also to do so cheaply without too many PayPal overheads.
And also kind of the aspect of, I don't know if it's just been some of the organised staff or just the word, but maybe the sort of target user is a little bit older as well, just it kind of being sort of simple and obviously safe and all of that kind of stuff as well.
But can I just wind back a little bit to the donations as well? The donations is actually quite a small part of the funding stream of the voluntary sector, less than 10%, or it was a couple of years ago. I mean, most of that now is, sorry, that's the voluntary sector as a whole, which doesn't mean to say that individual charities aren't completely donation run, but it's less than 10% there. There's kind of services and contracts.
The smaller the organisation gets, the higher the importance of the donation is. Because some of the sites I've worked on have been tiny organisations that nobody would have heard of in this room. You know, they're like the Glenrothes Heritage Centre and things like that. You know, they're just these tiny little organisations which are community driven, community funded. I mean, obviously we get some government funding as well, but it's predominantly about old ladies opening their purse. You know, so, yeah.
When you talk about community, and I think that's one of the things that, you know, is that almost one of the core things that we then need to build around a voluntary sector sort of, let's have our imaginary sort of use case for a voluntary sector where you've got community. Now, I think the challenge I've got with community is that not a lot of people want to manage a separate login for a WordPress site just to become a member of that community. People are happy to be a member of that community, but they don't. I'm saying a lot of people that I tend to work with don't spend all their lives online. I don't know why they don't, because but you know, there's a bit of diversity around the world. So how do you encourage that? You know, you end up then with a bunch of static information sites rather than sites where people are actually active and doing things. I don't know whether that's a
and I find it particularly difficult in, as I was saying, sort of areas where the user group is largely not people who use a lot of social media or not people who are using a lot of kind of things that it would be very easy to sort of chuck in and create a community feel without there necessarily being much moderation involved and things like that. But it's, I think that's something I've not really figured out yet.
I think that's really true. I mean, I get a lot of clients will come to me with their initial spec. They say, we want a forum. And I say, no, you don't want a forum. Have you got a staff member who's going to be able to put the time into keeping that forum running and encouraging people to contribute? And a small organisation, they don't. And yes, we can give you a forum, but it won't be used unless you're going to do that. I'd say, well, you could start with using the commenting that's built into WordPress. Encourage people to comment on posts and see where that leads you.
But I mean, that's not just subsector, though. That's
Sure.
any business.
But
the use of things like forums and even just commenting on standard WordPress sites. If you implement the Facebook commenting system, for example, my experience is everyone comments through Facebook, through the Facebook plugin, rather than will comment on the WordPress commenting system. And I think it's just because you're forcing people to play by your rules as opposed to just hanging out on Facebook.
I think the thing as well to note from a WordPress point of view, being geeky, if you give someone permission to moderate comments, that is the exact same user role and you can't change it, that they can edit anything on the website. So if we had a volunteer for one of our sites, we said, listen, here you go, and for Big Brother, and he was like just there to approve or deny comments. And then he realised actually that you could just go in and edit any post, because we only have 4 kept roles. Oh, we've got lots of roles. We have 4 roles with lots of attributes to it, and they're set to the same thing. So
I think that's being addressed actually. I'm not sure whether it's going to be in 3.3, but there is. I think there's already a new capability to just moderate comments, but I suspect that it's still tied to. And the actual fact is, the screen on which you can moderate comments required you to have the author role, and that was just wrong. It's just a bug in there. So I think that's being addressed, because I've hit exactly the same problem and ended up having to customise code to do it. One thing that kind of comes to mind when you're talking about people who are not always online is one of the plans we've got for our accessible website is the ability to send out newsletters, so physical newsletters. But one key thing is that we don't want to have to produce that content twice. So if we've got regular posts going on the website, and we want paper newsletters to go out, we definitely don't want them to do the two together. So we're going to be looking at effectively producing a PDF output or something from a WordPress post that's branded well and all the rest of it, or even a document output so it can be mail merged into to something else. And further beyond that, we're looking at sending out SMS alerts to people's phones, not to necessarily have a lot of information, because you've got only slightly more characters than you have in Twitter, but to just let people know that there's something new on the site and worth coming to, on new content or whatever. So still kind of ideas in the air at the moment, but I have done SMS integration from PHP before now, and it's quite doable. But WordPress does have some nice ways of integrating with MailChimp, for example. And there's a really good plugin which I wrote down. Chimp Express, yeah. So there's a basic MailChimp plugin that MailChimp themselves provide that just integrates your sign-up form for your mailing list with WordPress. But there's a better one, or a newer one, called Chimp Express, which allows you to create your newsletter content on your WordPress website, including pulling in this month's posts and things like that, which then get turned into your mailing list. So that effectively populates your newsletter that's going to go out to mail. Yeah, so I think hopefully you just need one more step to be able to turn that into a document that you can mail merge and produce physical letters that go out to people and so on. Yeah, so MailPress is a self-contained one, isn't it? That doesn't require the third-party mail out. Yeah, so
I just put it in for our clients, and he takes the posts and select the mailing list, and that's it. All the
Yeah.
posts getting mailed in.
Yeah, so MailPress allows you to completely run your mailing list from within your WordPress installation as well, which is can be quite good until you get too big and your hosting company bars you for sending out 4,000 emails in one day. Sorry? As I say, you can do, but MailPress itself allows you to completely manage everything yourself.
And it does them in small batches,
Yeah.
like 20 at a time every 2 minutes, so that you
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of hosting companies that have a limit of 300 emails per hour going out, things like that. They'll cut you off if you try and do more than that. So, yeah.
That's good. That's one of the things I'm looking for right now is a proper MailChimp integration.
Yeah.
Because it's a real pain having to do, somebody type into MailChimp exactly what they've just put into the post.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that Chimp Express is quite good.
Plus, I know it sounds really silly, but I've worked with so many companies that, not just even just commercial companies that have got newsletters and that have got a WordPress site, but it sounds so obvious, but the idea of just putting the two things together, I've often found that the content of the newsletter is written completely independently, although it's maybe not any better or any different really, but it's written completely separately, so it was like a light bulb moment for me.
I've got a funny example of that. A school that I run their site for, I went into a meeting because they want to upgrade their website, and they were telling me that they actually have a press officer or one of the teachers who volunteers to communicate achievements for the school, the press and so on, but they can't let him near the website because he's a rubbish speller. Literally, they don't want him putting content on the site. So one of the things I'm going to put in a proposal for them is to put some kind of workflow in there so that they can let him produce content, but it has to be approved, spell checked before the publish button gets up. But certainly that's something where, especially if people have got volunteers producing content for them, but they still want some kind of approval process because they just have to watch that quality for people who have only just started and might not be around for more than a few weeks, whether it's about getting the tone right or addressing people's needs correctly. Certainly with WordPress and a couple of plugins to support it as well, you can add a workflow into there so that people can produce content and publish it. The editors get emailed that we send to approve, to review and approve and so on. So there's a couple of useful plugins around that you can do and add on to your arsenal of tools for running a WordPress site.
I think as well, in terms of having something that goes as a newsletter and as online as well, it's the kind of separation of form and content, as Jim was talking about before. But what I've also found in the kind of information provision part of the voluntary sector is once you start making it available in another format, then further formats are then easier to make. So if you're then going to put that into Word as a format, I think it has advantages because that has an ecosystem around it. Some of it in there is there's a kind of speech to text, text to speech things within that. We found that was a way of accessing or providing information to other users. Also, when we were looking at kind of audio transcripts, we then had a kind of linearized version when we came out with the HTML. You've then got essentially a script that people can then speak on the tape and so on. So I think thinking right from the start, content and style then allows a lot of different ways of distribution.
Another, just thinking about the workflow thing and one of the ideas that we had for the voluntary radio organisation is that they have a very high turnover of volunteers. Some people are only there for 3 or 4 weeks. They actually run radio awareness courses and they always try and make them do a bit of everything. So no time for training. They're not around long enough to learn what the hell they're doing on the website. So one of the things that we looked at is a plugin that Mark Jaquith wrote called WP Help, I think, that allows you to create help pages that are just on the back end. So it's not about your content, but it allows you to literally create help pages for people, volunteers, so telling them how to fill them in, how to upload So you don't have to train them, but they've got this reference information, and particularly if you've got a specific way of building the site, where it's, oh, put it in this category and it will appear in the sidebar, or put it in this category and it will be, you know, front and centre on the home page. You can build those help pages with that plugin. That's quite good. The other thing that's coming in WordPress 3.3 is bubble help. Effectively, it's like a bubble help that comes up and gives you one of those kind of breakout boxes. Breakout boxes, yeah, but a bit of text and a little arrow pointing at, you know, a menu option or something like that, that tells you how to use this particular menu option, or go here to create a post or something. That it's not complete yet, it's still being built as we speak, but it seems to be that it supports first-time users. The first time somebody hits the screen, this bubble help will come up and point at a few different things that they need to do.
It's called a paperclip, isn't it?
No, it's almost called that. But that's a whole new feature that's coming in 3.3. If you actually download the latest trunk version or the overnight betas, the first time you run it, it starts popping up and tells you about all these new things, and the fact that the admin bar's changed across the top, and also I found the plugin that was already using it. It's not mature yet, but it looks like it's going to be really useful in terms of giving untrained users as much help as possible.
And is that customizable, or is that?
Absolutely, yeah. There's an API around you know, which things it points to, what the content is, and as I say, I've already come across a plugin that's using it. So it can be quite good. Yeah.
My sort of single biggest experience of WordPress is generally building a site, training a client, maybe making some documentation for them. It's almost always got custom things in it that are not straight what they won't find in the, you know, just by looking at the WordPress help files, whatever. And you know, I'll make just PDF documentation, which they almost always lose. And you know, or just I just don't have with them when they're logged in, or don't, you know, and it's particularly an organisation where maybe one person is trained and then 6 months down the line is a completely different person who's working on the site. And those tricky little custom things, you know, they can be confusing even to someone that's actually really quite technically capable, just because they didn't build it. So.
Yeah, and if it's something, even if you train somebody, if they only, you know, if it's changing the header image or something, they only do it once every couple of months, they'll absolutely have forgotten which bit I need to fiddle with. So yeah, so this bubble help is really, really useful.
Yeah, the event site that I manage, people are creating content once a month for a monthly event. Every month they forget.
Yeah.
Yeah. So every month they get something that goes up on the site that, yeah, it's not the right category, or it's not an event.
Yeah.
Custom post type, it's something else. And you just have to restrain myself from the email back to them and try and be patient and kind, but it doesn't always work. So I think things like that. I've used screencasts to try and train people, but again, you know, unless somebody's almost comes down to the digital generations.
Yes.
That a lot of people I'm working with are the older, probably the digital veterans, aren't they? What's that? People 55 and older. No insults to anybody who's up there, but you know, you think about there's the digital veterans, the digital immigrants, which are sort of the sort of Gen X people, and the digital natives who are all the kiddies who.
I'm an old man.
Listen, I turned 50 this year, Mike. I'm completely over the hill.
Well, I do next year, mate.
I think it can just be a lot for people to take in one sitting as well. You know, like I often do training sessions with clients who they're not necessarily not net savvy, even if they're not, you know, development savvy. But you know, you sit with them for 2 hours and tell them all these custom features, and after like an hour and a half, they must just be hearing wah 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 wah, you know, because it's just a lot.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
You know, so.
The other problem
with
with
isolating particular tasks. So, you know, if I want somebody to be able to just create a new post, can I take that out from the whole background of the dashboard and everything?
There are. You have to. I was going to say you have to write custom code to do it, but no, there actually are plugins as well that will allow you, for example, to create new roles and then hide stuff for people who's on that role, so you can take away almost everything. and then also, for example, you can, I'm trying to think what's one of the most common ones that's been around for quite a long time, but it allows you, for example, to restrict certain login. You can only edit one page, just this one page, or can only create posts in this one category. So yeah, absolutely, you can restrict it in that way that helps them, because it removes all the distractions, and when they log in, you get taken to the dashboard, there's only, you know, posts or new posts on this one page or this page and its children that they can modify. So that's great for people in areas or departments, and I can't for the life of me think what the
It's just in Tadlock's member plugin.
Which one,
Tadlock's member plugin does it, but you need to write a little bit of custom code to go with it. But he walks you through. It's really good.
There's another one that's even more generic than that, and its name is something to do with roles and capabilities.
I know what you mean, sorry.
And it's called. Quick, look it up.
It's one that I.
Mike is a role scope.
It's role scope.
Role scope, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so that's really good. It allows you to assign. It is big, but okay, if you want to do things like assigning individual people to individual pages, you need to keep it. But if you're just, for example, creating roles with very specific uses, you can actually turn it off, because roles is one of the things that actually gets saved after the plugin's gone away. But if you need it to manage the pages and things like that, there are also some commercial ones as well. So WPMU Dev do quite a number of help systems to allow you to manage people and restrict roles and things like that. They also have a plugin. It's something to do with Wizard. It's got Wizard in the name, that simplifies the back end of WordPress, but even has a kind of a step-by-step, take you through step-by-step.
Easy blogging, isn't it? It's called Easy Blogging.
Easy blogging, that's the one, which seems to be good mainly to getting people to blog, but I really want to get a hold of it and rip the code apart and have a look and see what else I can make it do, because it sounds like a really good system. Maybe the new 3.3 help system.
Isn't that one of the issues as well? I mean, we talked about it earlier about releases, and you're trying to work with organisations that have learned how to do, you know, posts in an admin screen, and then it gets upgraded and it completely changes.
Yes.
You then have to go back and retrain them how to do the same things.
You also have to update your training. So we've had an admin UI update in 2.8, 3.0, 3.2 and 3.3. They all change the workflow, they all change how it looks. So for my clients, I have to go and update the screencasts, the training manuals, and then retrain them. Just because we've changed something from a click menu to a hover menu, or we've actually moved. The great one that through one of my clients was in 3.2 we moved the menu 3 pixels to the left, which was a great thing. But she went, well, it doesn't look the same anymore. To us, we didn't realise, but she was like, this must be a new menu. This training manual's crap. And I had to go and give a whole day of training just to say the menu's moved. And I think sometimes, and I realise I missed the WordPress and enterprise speak. But once we start dealing with people that are not just blogging, it's little things like this that actually really snowball for guys like us.
Absolutely.
I think we talked about it before, about separating security from functionality, but having the options even within functionality about what you can bring across. I know they're quite, you know, a lot of them are going to be quite heavily interdependent, but that would then give you the flexibility. Like, there's something that isn't going to change all my documentation, but it's really good. We'll bring that in, but we'll leave the, you know, look and feel of it exactly the same. It'd make it a lot easier for the training.
So for one of my charity clients, she's decided to stop updating WordPress. So she's become entirely numb to security updates, because she says, seriously, I've had 9 updates this year, I'm not doing it anymore. So the next time there's a security update, I literally can't pay her to update it. I'll have to go in, because she's like, what's the point? Yeah. And that's, you know, security and functionality, we need to make sure that, like the Tim Thumb thing, we need to like get it out there and say, this is security, you need to do it. This is an admin UI change. You know, it should be a business case optional scenario.
So, security, I change that. They're certainly looking to go from a single code base that does results to a sort of tree structure of the code, which, you know, then obviously the merges back into the trunk and things like that, which is quite a change to the.
There was the idea of what did they call them? They weren't core plugins. It was something. It was an idea touted about a year ago, and the idea is to have, just like at the moment, the Kismet is the one plugin that comes with, well, if we know Hello Dolly, canonical plugins, that's the one. And that was an idea, but at the moment it actually has proven to be too difficult to A, select them, and B, kind of audit them appropriately. But I think the idea is still there, is that some of the functionality of WordPress should start becoming plugins, so that effectively you have the choice to turn stuff off or not turn it on as it gets richer and more complex. And kind of a little bit going back to the enterprise side of things, I think one of the reasons why there isn't legacy support and that it changes so often is that as wonderfully stable at the kind of low level as it is, I mean, there have been really big security issues on really big bugs in WordPress for a while. Functionally, it's still not stable. I think it's got a long way to go before it becomes very stable, such that the idea of supporting legacy versions, because the core of it really doesn't change that much, is still quite a way off, which is wonderful for us developers. It keeps getting better, but yeah, it's not good for enterprise, but it's also not good for small organisations who just haven't got the time or the resources to retrain constantly. They want to get on with their job and not manage their sites.
See, just on the voluntary sector, again, talking about making life easier for everybody involved in it, to me it would be, because it's a commercial thing, training and support is a commercial thing that you could offer, you know, as a separate business in itself, but specifically for the voluntary sector, it'd be nice to see an organisation or a collection of people that came up with standard training material, because everybody must spend redundant amount of time making the same training material or coming up with the same themes.
Yeah.
You know, if you could collect that together and come up with, here's a set of training videos, so when a new release comes out, you could update that, and then there'd be a collective group of people that could access it and say, I've just saved myself, you know, a couple of hours or 5 hours coming up with new material that I can then share with that community.
So my video is on Think Vitamin for that,
yeah.
Which is run by Personified.
Sorry, say that again?
My video for doing that is on thinkvitamin.com, which is run by Personified, because,
Yeah.
So there are a couple of commercial options out there as well that have, they take care of producing these professional videos. There's one plugin that allows you to build that into your site, so wherever somebody is on the back end, there's a link to click on a video of how to use this page. The problem that I've found, and I've been thinking about a similar solution, is that they of course are very generic, and almost always they're about the full functionality of WordPress, and actually you want to take that away, and you do want to have your training materials very much geared to the site that you've built, whether it's as simple as create a post in the feature category to make it appear on the front page, or it's, you know, make sure you create an event when you want to publicise the next jumble sale, whatever it might be, and therefore unfortunately you're not going to get generic videos that cover that, and it's a shame, but it's
because it's almost about telling people stuff they don't need to know rather than not even tell them enough. Like, you know, out of the last hour of my site, I felt, I don't know how long it's been since a client's actually used the log roll function, you know, the links manager, because we've always been telling the tooling, that were the ones I'm building anyway. And that's just a whole chunk of stuff they just don't need to know about. And I usually say, just know that. You don't need to know about that. But, you know, you don't want them to have to sort of watch it and then think, oh, should I be doing that?
Absolutely,
and,
yes.
You know,
It's interesting the way that we work on a development cycle, you know, because, and maybe that's a lesson for me, is actually put as much effort into designing the admin screens as you put into designing the front end, because that's how you'll get people to constantly come back and use it in a sensible way. And I think that's something I generally don't do at the moment, because I just sort of throw things together, make it look nice in the front end, and people on the back end.
I mean, there's accessibility guidelines for kind of web content, but also the kind of authoring tools, which aren't, you know, aren't done together, which may be somewhere, and people are now getting used to writing stuff on websites, on web pages. Can I ask you, Mike? you've worked with some deaf users to build a WordPress site. Are these kind of British Sign Language users predominantly?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is different language, different grammatical structure and all that kind
Absolutely,
of thing. Can I ask if there are any
so basically, the two key things that we've done is on the key pages of the site, we have a BSL video that is somebody interpreting the site, because it is interpretation, as you say, it is a separate language. The other thing is keep it as simple as possible, keep the language simple, because, for a lot of deaf from birth users, English is their second language, BSL is their first language, so you absolutely have to keep everything as simple as possible. So one of the things that I had to take away was multiple ways to filter the calendar of events that you can view, because it became too complex. And so we took it away and made it much simpler, so you can only select to search for, filter for all the BSL movies or all the captioned movies and not do multiple ones. We're going to build that later, but we'll build it as a preference for a user, a registered user, rather than give somebody a complex form to fill in. So that was key. We also, on the same site, support blind users as well. And we have deaf people and blind people on the board of the company. So again, making sure that the site is accessible and all the rest of it. Talking about about the back end, the WordPress core group are aware that the back end is not as accessible as it should be, and they are absolutely making efforts to do so, but it's quite difficult in that it's it's a complex back end. Everybody wants to do wonderful things with JavaScript and jQuery and all the rest of it, and most of the people who are involved in adding code to it really have no training whatsoever in accessibility. But Jane Wells, who alternately people love and hate, has a background in usability and accessibility, and she is trying to direct the changes in the back end to make sure that they're more accessible and things like that. So for example, the widgets has an accessible mode. Unfortunately, you've got to switch modes, but it means that you don't need to be able to drag and drop to manage your widgets. So for somebody using a screen reader, it actually now becomes possible to use widgets, which you couldn't do before. So things are getting better, but it's not all there yet. But certainly there are plugins to just strip stuff off the back end, and that just on its own makes things better. If you genuinely want to kind of strip stuff off the back end for accessibility reasons, it's worth checking how a plugin does it. Some plugins use CSS to hide menu items. It's no good for people using a screen reader. That menu item is still going to be there. So you have to look at plugins that do it the right way, because there's APIs to remove all the stuff, to move them about, whatever you want. Look for plugins that do that. Check the code and say, has this menu item really gone? Has this dialog box really gone? But yeah, definitely.
I was going to change tack slightly, if you don't mind, because one of the things I talked about, this NGO, that sort of engineering NGO that operates in a number of different countries. Now, they're basically a UK-based organisation. They're distributed all throughout the UK, and they use a forum quite heavily. Chris, you were talking about forums. One of the ideas that one of the leaders has is to form them into effectively a cell type organisation where you've got communities of interest. So you've got all the guys who do water pumps, all the people who do irrigation ditches and that sort of thing, all the people who know about toilets, or all in special interest groups. So I've been thinking about using BuddyPress for that. Has anybody got any experience of actually implementing BuddyPress for that type of community?
We built a site for community food. It's pretty different, but the same kind of structure. It's community food training, and they've got special interest groups around that. We use BuddyPress for that. So yeah, it sounds like exactly what BuddyPress is designed for.
Certainly BuddyPress supports the concept of groups and having people join groups, and it supports, one of the options is one forum per group, so you can separate out forums, and you can make them private and invite only or whatever, but certainly the structure's in place for that.
is there a migration path from the form that you use at the moment is PHP-BB? Is there a migration path from that to BuddyPress? I know there is to...
Not that I'm aware of. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
There kind of is. You can go from PHP-BB to the BBPress standalone, from that to the plugin.
Okay.
The new BuddyPress 1.5 pulls that in, but there's a chance, a good chance, you'll lose stuff along the way. Attachment signatures, you'll definitely lose them.
Right.
And it's the going from 0.9 to 0.1 of the standalone, because they're not compatible, even though they're the same thing, to the BBPress plugin to 1.5. That you'll lose stuff along the way, but in terms of a big chunk of the data, it works okay.
Yeah, the problem is they've got a bunch of documents in their forums.
Oh yeah, that's good.
So it's good.
Guys, we're kind of at the end of the scheduled time for this. I just wanted to check if Dominic snuck in while it wasn't working. Which leaves us with a choice. We can carry on chatting. The discussion seems to be going well, so we can carry on with this. How does everybody feel?
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing that I think you mentioned at the beginning from my interview that I did at WordCamp was this idea of vertical applications built on WordPress. I don't know if anybody has thought about that or even come across those, but I think it's something very much worth considering, particularly if you are looking at you do a lot of work that's the same. So some people sometimes specialise, whether deliberately or just because of the clients that they pick up and then word of mouth from their clients, in particular niche areas, whether it's building websites for musicians or pet fan sites or whatever it might be. But this idea of kind of putting together a package of WordPress, a theme, maybe a theme that has 2 or 3 child variations of it, and then a bunch of pre-configured plugins is, I think, something that's going to get more and more. And I think if people find themselves doing the same thing over and over again, they should think about trying to package it that way. WordPress actually supports that, believe it or not. There, you can create a file called install.php, which I think you either drop in the root or delete the content, I can't remember which. But it allows you to, A, completely override WordPress's default installation, or add to it, or replace certain bits of it. But basically gives you the opportunity, right at the beginning of WordPress installation, to run your own code. And that can include, so for example, you create a zip file that's not just WordPress, but it's sort of the themes and the plugins all in the right directories, it's easy enough to do. And then the install routine will then go and enable those plugins and even pre-configure them, activate the right theme, and you can then even write code to stick widgets in the sidebar or whatever. So there's the support is already in place in WordPress to actually build a vertical application like that. And certainly if you find yourself writing practically the same site for the 4th time, with a different logo and a different colour set, and a different name, then it's definitely something that's worth considering, just for your own sake, in that you then get into the situation where A, it's easy for you to do, B, it's perhaps easier for you to support or for you to update because you're always using the same plugins for people, and then actually it gives you a package that you can sell and make a much bigger profit on, or you can reduce your price to say, well, as long as you don't mind it being the same functionality as these guys, but we'll do your logo and do your colours, then I can do it for, in 3 days instead of 7 days or whatever it might be. And certainly in terms of the voluntary sector, putting something like that together, whether it's originally funded by multiple people pooling their resources together or whatever, I think that's just something that's going to become quite huge and can be really big.
Do you not think that to a certain extent you're doing it by doing that, like I see where that could be useful, but do you not think you're kind of doing a disservice to clients and users by doing that if you're not very careful with it? Like, the voluntary sector, there's so many different organisations that have completely different goals, and I tend to find that if you give them a package, they will write content to fit your package.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, you do.
Really, you should be taking that content and saying, right, this is content up front for starters, and then this is what you need. Like, your goals are not the same as the next charity or organisation. And I just think that by packaging that up, people will go, oh, sweet, charity WordPress, done.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, you do have to be careful about that. But by the same token, there are definitely very similar needs, whether it be some of the things we've discussed already about, you know, newsletters going out regularly where you absolutely don't want them to have to write the content twice and things like that. For me, I always think of something like that from a functionality point of view, so it's absolutely not about the content. Always they need to have a choice of themes, even if they're based on the same framework or whatever. But it's about that standard functionality and the glue code around it and the configuration around it. You don't have to do constantly afresh every time. And sometimes that just is a much better package for them, particularly if they haven't got a big enough budget to go custom the whole way.
What appeals to me about it, not from a reseller point of view, but from a developer point of view, is like I could name you like 4 plugins I use on almost every site I build. And of course doing something like that to like wrap them up and wrap up. I also have like a base theme that I often start with. It's just really stripped, kind of basic structure. So like wrap that up with some plugins and some basic settings and use it myself as a base would be really cool instead of having to kind of install everything separately.
Can I just add, you can do a similar thing using a multi-site installation, which I think is a bit cleaner because you end up with the option to do multiple site templates, let's call them that, because that's what the plugin that I use calls them. For example, I'm working on a charity project hosted within multi-site, and we started with an animal trust, and that's, you can imagine if it's, for example, an animal charity that offers animals to be taken in for care, or animals that then go for adoption. That's going to be the same whether it's one side of the country or the other. So initially I had a much wider scope by creating a site that I thought would serve the needs of all charities. And then what the system allows you to do is sign up. It then copies all the functionality from that site, and it can also include content, so you can put some more written pages in if you test process if you want. It can enable plugins, but also have plugins that are there disabled, and then when you enable them, they'll become active. But the initial grand idea of that just didn't work because we were creating something that was too generic. So we scaled it back and started again and just made one that works just for animal charities at the moment. So if you sign up, you can get a page, well, a site that will basically clone the site that's gone live last week, and it will allow you to then create animal records through custom post types with a thumbnail and likes, dislikes, basically what the Dogs Trust do, what the Dogs Trust do. You can post them through blog posts and also do pages and menus, and it's got a limited set of themes that are designed to be activated and modified on a design level. We're actually using the Pro's child theme by Studio, but depending on you use that one. It's sort of a really slimmed down functionality in terms of you can change the background colour, the header image, fonts, similar to Thesis or Canvas by Ruthless, but really simple. And again, pushing that onto other charities just didn't work. Everybody said that it was either too limiting or they just wouldn't change it from what it came out of the box. So I think what I've decided is multi-site's quite flexible. You can actually have multiple multi-site installs on a server. It gets a little bit of a mouthful when you start saying. But you can, for example, set up a multi-site install that is just for animal charities, and when someone signs up, they will sign up and activate that. And then you say, well, let's have one for children's charities, for example. Then you have a different multi-site installation, and then you activate that. And it's the same, it's still WordPress, but it's a different multi-site installation. The advantage there is with updating plugins, you can platforms below them, and different sites. And all the functionality that obviously multi-site is a good platform because .com uses it, but it is difficult to come up with a generic base that says every site that is a charity or is a voluntary environment to use this and they'll be happy with it. They clearly aren't going to be, because they need different levels of functionality, and some of them, it might be just a term of scaling it. So. But it's early days for that one. I think there's a bit more planning on that to be able to do it.
I don't think you can underestimate just how much time that saves you. We did a similar approach using a similar plugin, and it used to take us maybe 3 or 4 hours, Martin, to set up these individual sites, and it now takes us 10 to 15 minutes. And it's like when you roll that out over 10 or 20 or 30 sites, you've just saved yourself a couple of days worth of work, and then you can focus on customizing it afterwards and making it more unique.
Yeah,
it's really useful.
There's a couple of the plugin that I use is the WP and UDEV version, but there is one on the open plugin directory. But it only works on multi-site. I think it's called site template. The WPM use called blog template, but it's the same thing. Essentially, you create a site, fill it with content, enable disabled plugins, and when you copy that site to a new multi-site instance, it looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
One of the things it's missing, unfortunately, is you can, in the back end, create sites on demand, and there's a little drop down that allows you to select from multiple templates. So you might have set up one that's got slightly different things with slightly different plugins in multi-site, and you can do that in the back end, but on the sign-up screen, you just get the default template, that you set up in the back. So what would be nice is during the sign-up, you could have the option, do you want your site to look like this, or this?
Yeah.
And then it would inherit that. But that's something I would try to hack into this project, just to
certainly in terms of saving time and making things easier, I was involved in a project for Norfolk parishes and the East Anglian area. Each of the parishes, and there are literally hundreds of them, have their own website or web presence of some description, a lot of which were hopelessly out of date, which were spread over at least 3 or 4 different providers. And I got involved with a scheme to basically bring them all together, and we ended up with a WordPress multi-site based thing. They actually all had the same theme, but with 3 different colour options. But it was actually based on 2010, so it was generic enough that they could customise it, widgets and all the rest of it. And that has been phenomenally successful. At the moment, I think we're up to about 150 sites have now moved. Onto that, we're using domain mapping, so all the old URLs work. And it's been brilliant, and it's actually better. They are all now updating their sites better than they were, more often, more regular, all the meetings, all the town council minutes go on there and all the rest of it. And it's been brilliant, and actually by restricting their choices, it's made it better. Fair enough, they are effectively all the same client, all the same customer. It's a parish council, they've got the same requirements and the same needs. But it's actually been brilliant to bring them in, and again, it's minutes now to set up a new one. So that's been quite a good thing. And again, all WordPress based and WordPress multi-site, it's been brilliant to do that.
Is Alex, is that worth, are these sort of ideas worth a punt around the Council of Voluntary Organisations in Scotland, or whatever they're called these days, and just to actually, is almost a business opportunity here for people in this room to actually get involved in something like that?
I think so. It's not just SCVO would be the umbrella body. There's a number of different umbrella bodies, but I think that's the way to approach it. You can go with a kind of larger organisation who already knows the kind of sub £25,000 a year organisations, has done a measure of that, an amount of the kind of information gathering and things. So SCVO would be one of the umbrella bodies. There's the housing associations. Children in Scotland is the children's sector. There's a variety of these organisations. I would suspect Long-Term Conditions Alliance Scotland, sorry, should be one included there, which is an alliance. It's kind of 1 in 3 of us, 1 in 4 of us have long-term conditions that need to be managed. This is and they're an umbrella body for that, for those organisations. So being in touch with those people would certainly identify kind of business opportunities.
Off the top of my head, wild idea. Is this something that WP Scotland could be helping involved in? Is actually connecting people who need sites like that with people in this room who can actually develop and deliver that sort of package? It's maybe a wider question for later on today.
You certainly see a diversity of sites, a diversity of hosting providers, and I mean some of the bigger sites have very good web presences, whereas the smaller sites would like to kind of move on.
And it's maybe the business opportunity is identifying those like families of sites, like parish councils, where almost a drop-down menu of what you want to do in a vertical sense actually will make sense. So, can get your business heads thinking through.
Everybody does one small bit. It'll all be done.
And if you would, and there's a lot of it as well. I mean, there's still, grant funding is being cut, but there are still grants that are available, and often for charitable organisations, or not-for-profits, or cooperatives as well. So that might be a kind of any of those kind of structures might actually work for, but then accessing that kind of funding stream. When you talk about all people, lots of people chipping in, I think to have that, there may also be getting a very big site and having a sympathetic developer who then GPLs the.
I suppose that's the other question: is how do we as developers get involved with voluntary organisations? There's our own personal networks, which is one thing, but are there other ways in which we can actually seek out business and seek out opportunities?
There's an annual volunteer recruitment fair run by a CDO, usually happens around September, and you can go on, the whole group of voluntary organisations in one place. You can go on and say, well, I'm a technology bot, I'm a web development bot, and sometimes they go, oh, that's exactly what we need. Because usually they're emphasising or seeking specific kinds of volunteers, but there's still the opportunity to open up dialogue with them.
Yeah, United Nations runs another one. I can't remember what it's called, but it'll be something with UN at the start of it. I'll try and find it and post it on Twitter later on. But they're looking for volunteers. Some of the opportunities I've seen are develop a website for a small community organisation in Kenya. So you're actually you're developing a site, but you're also building capacity within somewhere like Kenya without actually having to get a plane.
I had contacted my council's local umbrella organization for voluntary organizations, trying to offer them my services, and they would not return my phone calls, they would not return my emails. I thought that was very rude. And then I walk past them and I see a sign up in their window that they're offering their own £200, 5-page static website service to voluntary organizations. So if we don't get in there, they will. And they're not working.
And actually I've heard they're doing site literature schools. One of my colleagues was at a parents' meeting the other day, and he said, the schools are getting charged X £100 per website. So, and they've got no money to run together, so basically my colleague's doing it for them. So again, it's getting in the right level with the right people. I think councils are probably bad because they're bureaucratic and have got their own people to look after. Sorry to anybody who actually works in the council.
John, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? It's like that could be something really useful that you can take away from what this event is looking to set up some kind of organisation. I don't know, but anytime I go looking for themes or templates or anything, I'm always finding organisations in America or all across the world. I don't know whether the UK's got an equivalent or Scotland's got an equivalent. We could say here's charity press or here's charity themes or whatever. It'd be really good if that was one of the goals of this group or the wider group to come up with some organisation like that.
And certainly if it's pitched right, packaged right, and just built right, functionality wise, it can be something for new organisations to have to just be able to say, right, okay, we know we need a web presence and we need people to be able to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it, to have something effectively pre-packaged that they can say, well, I want to use this, I just want to pay somebody a couple of days to set it up for me, and they're off and running. And I think that would be a wonderful resource for small groups to have, because otherwise somebody's going to get in and sell them a static 5-page site that they can't update. They've got to go back to the original guide to update it, and then they caught by the short curls.
I was watching. I very rarely watch adverts on telly because of the busy thing you've got anymore. But I caught an advert. I caught an advert recently, which is one-on-one sites. Have you seen it? Okay. It makes my whole sort of all the hairs on my body sort of stood on end when I saw that. But maybe that's the landscape that we're moving into that it's becoming less people are going to specialists to fight to get this done. Websites are becoming commodities. So how do we commoditize something like WordPress to actually help them get something decent?
To be fair, I think what often happens is they do that the hard way and then they end up back.
Yeah.
That's exactly my philosophy. In fact, I would rather that they spend £200 on a lousy website than they come to me in a year's time with 10 times that amount of money to spend and say,
and humbler than
You do have to be careful though. A friend of mine runs works in an art shop, and the boss there, non-techie, paid probably a small fortune to somebody a good few years ago to build them an online shop, which the guy did, and they've got products there, and they've got an ordering system, and it comes through as an email and all the rest of it. The guy has since disappeared. They literally do not have a login to the site, and the site is still there with 3-year-old prices. And the owner of the shop is so scared and so put off by that experience that she won't let me help out and build a new site for her, because at least it's there and people order stuff, even though now we're starting to lose money on something, but at least we've got a new customer. And it's like, oh, please, just I'll help you. She's had such a bad experience that she will not, at least the website's there, is how she treats it. So she just pays for the hosting. And it's just, it's like, oh, poor sod. The guy, I mean, probably not with any, malicious intentions, just he's moved on, he's changed his number or whatever, and they've just got no way of contacting, they can't even log in.
So I was working for someone like that, I'd change my number too.
Well, I think the difficult thing that happens sometimes is often sites are built, but there is no maintenance contract, there is no ongoing agreement, and so you can't necessarily expect it's particularly small scale, sometimes freelance or whoever, to just kind of sit in the same house by their phone for the rest of their life in case they decide to kind of repel them again, and that's what happens.
I think as well in a smaller market, I think Scotland, specifically Edinburgh, is a good Michael Scotland in this, is that people don't get a great return on investment for a website unless they are a company of a particular size, or they're particularly using their website for something specific. The number of plumber websites out there that are built by a bloke down the pub, we're never going to break into that market. But the reality is, given the huge proliferation of crap websites built by idiots in pubs, and my 14-year-old can use WordPress to do this, that actually the perception of our industry and what we do, especially in one-man band shops or smaller agencies, has plummeted. I mean, I know that almost all my work now comes from England, because the reality is I go to someone in Scotland and they're like, nah, to be honest, I know a bloke and a bloke and a bloke, and we'll get the same return on investment out of it. And I think, Edinburgh's a great example. We only have 3 or 4 agencies in Edinburgh that have 10 people or more, in comparison to Manchester or Glasgow that has however many or whatever, and we have to sometimes remember the market we're in, and we can't treat Edinburgh or Scotland on the whole in the same way as we treat Manchester or London or anything like that. It's horses for courses.
So just, you mentioned of the return on investment, that's something that, in my experience, people absolutely need educating on and understanding. If they're not selling the product, they need to understand what their return on investment is, and certainly the educational side that I've been involved in, because the funding on that is quite substantial, so 200k plus. That Wellcome Trust, the charity, absolutely want a figure for their return on investment, and for them, and they worked in conjunction with the client, and my client was actually building, organising the site and everything. They worked out what the specific metrics were, and in this case it's the pupils' involvement, so it's how many questions the kids have asked and how many comments have been put on there, as well as how many visitors to the site and so on. And so they've got a whole series of metrics that they have to not only record, but then interpret and produce an end-of-event report. So they run this event for 2 or 3 weeks, a couple of times a year, although they're now about to do the 3rd time this year. And that then goes back to Wellcome Trust, so that they can show to their board or whatever, their contributors, that yeah, here's the return on investment. These children, these students were involved, engaged in science or whatever it might be. So again, whether it's people who sign up to your newsletter, whether it's visits to your new pages or whatever, it's key that whatever you do build should have the ability to track that return on investment, because it's absolutely not. If you look at any resources on the web, it's all about how many sales you've made, and that doesn't apply. So yeah, you need to make sure that you, one, explain to them how they're going to get return on investment, and even if it's just awareness of what they do. So every time they've got a new event on, if you can say, well, you've had 400 or 500 people this month to look at your what's on page, then you can say, well, that's of value. We've informed those people who may not have seen the small ad in the free paper, whatever. So there are different ways that you can make sure that people understand that the return on investment is a bit different from normal, from commercial, and then make sure that whatever you build in WordPress has got the Google stats and got so some of the forms plugins will tell you how many people saw the form versus how many people filled in the form and so on, your MailChimp tracking and stuff like that. So again, that's key to making sure people understand they're getting the value out of it, and it's not just what the book down the pub can build.
Yeah, but I think even picking up on that, I think it is particularly bad in Scotland, because the number of people that I've dealt with in the past that came in and said, I want a website, and go, well, why do you want a website? Because I know I need one. And they'll go and they'll get different quotes, and they'll get it built, and they spend $5 grand, and then they come back and speak to you in 6 months' time and go, it's not working. And you're like, well, what do you mean it's not working? Well, I'm not getting any sales. And you start bringing in all the other dimensions that are involved with running a good website, and they're just like, no, I just want you to fix it. It's not working. I think they see it as a technical thing. They go, it's not working. And you're like, okay, can you do this, this, and this? No, I just want you to fix it. And you're like, I can't. It's just a general lack of knowledge.
Running a business, it's not a
website.
Yeah, that's true. But given the number of developers, and when developers talk to people who have a tendency to evangelize what we think, so why do you want a website, or why do you want to use a WordPress website? And the first thing most of us would probably say is, it's awesome. Well, that's great, but that means absolutely nothing to the guy on the road. I use plumbers as a great example because everyone needs them. They're pretty much recession-proof, because if your toilet breaks in a recession, you're still going to phone a plumber. And the number of plumbers and vans in Scotland that run by and still have Bob79 whatever at AOL.btinternet.co. You're sitting there going, that to me is like a really obvious KPI for exactly how a country or a town or a subsection is doing. If you've managed to convince your plumbers to actually have email at and their domain name, then something in your community has got it. Whereas that kind of isn't happening.
And Yale and Thompson Low hit the plumbers all the time.
Yeah.
Their phones are getting, I tried to do it, just at the Yellow line there.
Exactly.
Who are you?
Yeah.
The plumber has an email address on the van. Mine still has 041, but
Yeah, and that's it. So we attempt to tell people, that the internet is changing how people find information and all the rest of it. Yellow pages, the actual printed thing is pretty much a thing of the past. But actually, that doesn't apply to every business model out there. We see the advantages of some of these people, but we can't predict the return on investment.
Sorry, I meant that Yellow pages are selling websites.
Yellow pages have now moved onto the web, and exactly that, But in terms of, if I want a plumber, or a builder, or anything, it doesn't really mean much to the man on the street. And sometimes I think that we evangelise the technology so much that we kind of forget that.
I think to be fair, that sometimes also, I don't mean so much in the return on investment aspect, but people have these really shitty services that they use, but they don't necessarily know that there's something better. They'll assume that that's what everything's like, so that everything functions the same way. And so there's some small organisations that I've worked with where they've had these sort of free, awful kinds of websites that are really arduous to update and really arduous to use, but for them that's what having a website is, that's how it works. And so the evangelism can sometimes just be about making their life easier as well, but they don't necessarily know that it can be easier.
That's exactly right. We do a lot of work through Business Gateway, where the audience is brand new starts, many plumbers, many small businesses. You know, there's always a plumber, there's always a photographer. Easy entry to business, and they come in, and some of them are very proud in the room. Yes, we've got a website, and they're on Google, you know, site builder. They're on, you know, Women, you know, 123+ and all these other things. And after 3 hours with me talking about SEO and accessibility at their level, they walk out going, God, our website sucks. Because they know they can't change titles and can't update and can't do all these things. But you're exactly right, it's their initial expectation as to what a website is, not having the education as to what we know websites to be.
Is there another opportunity here for the whole group of us in WordPress Scotland to do that evangelism? We put case studies on the site for clients who have had good experiences with us as developers. And doing that educational things so that when people are looking for websites, they might come to that and see those below. It's another opportunity that might be on today.
I think if you do that, I'd love to see how many people come in IE6 and IE7.
Absolutely.
You know, considering for the last beta, we decided we were going to drop IE7 and then said, no, actually we're going to support it. We're just not going to test the back end of it. I think we have to realise that we work in a very different market than the world's biggest internet community. And having that driving, we've got to realise this isn't us.
Pizza?
Thank you guys so much.
The pizzas are here.
You want to carry on chatting about the stuff because it seems like we could go on the edge. There's so much interesting stuff coming on.